Hello and welcome to this week's BizSmart Lunch and Learn webinar. Our weekly webinars are aimed to provide advice and share knowledge amongst business owners. And if you'd like to keep up to date on our latest webinars, please make sure you follow us on SlideShare or subscribe to our YouTube channel. You can also access all of our resources for business owners just by leaving us a comment. Our host joining me today is BizSmart Select member David Lynes. But before we start the webinar, can I ask you all to use the question mark function on your screen and post any questions that you may have for David, and he'll do his best to answer them all at the end of the session. Thank you, David. Over to you.
Thanks so much, Caroline. So this week's webinar is covering the complexities of workforce scheduling. So the sectors we tend to work with, cleaning, home care, security, have some quite complex models and patterns for scheduling their workforce. And what we mean by workforce is, generally speaking, carers, cleaners going out to a particular site, a particular shift, and performing a job function. Now, the aims of the workforce scheduling, whether it's a system, whether it's paper-based, is essentially to help with staff motivation. So by getting workforce scheduling and rostering correct and right, will increase staff motivation. Will also allow customers to be able to reduce costs. So being able to make sure that whether it's mileage, whether it's from a compliance point of view, be able to reduce those costs and make sure that overheads are kept down. Also, in terms of workforce scheduling, the aim is to increase productivity. And so, excuse me, let's go back on. Okay, so increase productivity and make sure that all of the workforce are working to, not necessarily maximum capacity, but at a sufficient level that is sustainable long term. But also staff retention. Staff retention is important, and one of the big factors that we see, particularly in the care sector, cleaning sectors, recruiting, training, onboarding staff, employees, carers is a big cost to a business. And so being able to retain those staff is a big sort of challenge. Increased service delivery. So the idea of good, solid workforce scheduling is being able to deliver correctly, accurately, on time, whether that be a carer going into somebody's home, whether that's a cleaner. The idea is that actually service is delivered to a really sort of high standard. And then the other factor there is also in terms of overtime reduction. So by scheduling correctly, making sure that's delivered, overtime and unexpected sort of charges can be reduced. So they're the overall aims of a kind of workforce scheduling sort of solution in essence. However, currently, and if you look at the sort of evolution here, we've moved from paper-based scheduling, so that's using A1 pieces of paper pinned to a wall, sticky notes, and sort of very manual-based sort of scheduling and deciding where somebody should be, through to somewhere in the middle that is more Excel, still manual, but we see a lot of clients working with a very complex Excel spreadsheet to try and work out where people should be, what time they should be there. And that gets obviously sort of very sort of manual and time consuming. And then the evolution one step further then is to try and automate that complete process. However, there are some challenges and some difficulties in doing that. But first of all, I mean, this topic and our sort of area of expertise is very much in the sort of the remote workforce. So block A, where we deal with care workers, cleaners, security, temp staff, and those are all remote. So a cleaner will be going out to somebody's office and actually performing a job function. A carer will be going to somebody's home. And so those are the remote workforces that we tend to work with. There are other types, for example, office staff, factory staff going into a fixed location and performing a job. So the scheduling element here, I'm not necessarily talking about project planning, resource allocation within a fixed environment. I'm tending to talk about remote workforces where there's multiple shifts. And so on that, there is a sort of a myriad of different sort of challenges that a care company, a cleaning company, whoever it might be, has in terms of planning and scheduling their staff. So the top point there, availability. whether care staff, employees are available to work. They might have some schedule. They might be part-time and therefore can't be available all of the time. And so actually storing and tracking availability of employees is important. Next point round, so going clockwise, whether they're approved. So we see a lot of instances where an employee is approved or not to work with a certain client. And then third point there, continuity. So the care sector tends to want to provide the same carers into the same environments time and time again, because that they build up rapport, they build up a relationship, and so actually that provides really good continuity. But that's common across lots of different sectors. Cleaners in sort of factories or offices, you would want to be providing the same staff at that particular site if you possibly could. Fourth point there, qualifications. So whether that staff member is qualified enough to perform that job function. And on the side of that, there is also whether they're competent. So they might be qualified, but do they have the right competencies to deliver that service? So again, talking about care sectors, they might be qualified, might be the right carer, but also whether they're competent to perform that job function. Again, in the care sector, we've got sort of customers and accounts that have certain preferences, and so those need to be sort of put into the mix of choosing the right carer for a particular shift. And then a big one at the moment is distance. So with new legislation with areas like waiting time, national living wage, national minimum wage, the distance and therefore travel time is becoming a big element, particularly in sectors where there's a remote workforce. So trying to then account for 6 different criteria in trying to decide who the right carer is to go and either cover a shift or perform that job function can be difficult. However, manually on a piece of paper you could do that with a low number of sort of care workers or employees. However, the challenge is when you're then trying to manage and schedule and plan hundreds of people. Now, the challenge gets exponentially large when you're looking at multiple availability models, lots of distance and travel time calculations, lots of variables in terms of qualifications, also trying to make sure there's some continuity in there. The actual kind of myriad of combinations becomes huge, and a huge challenge to try and deal with in any sort of paper-based system or Excel-based product. And we see lots of clients that have got a very, very messy sort of scheduling model. And often retention is affected because carers don't get the number of hours they need. They may be travelling long distances because of the ad hoc sort of shifts that are being sort of provided. So the real challenge there is not necessarily to schedule one shift that might be an hour and choosing the right carer or the right employee, but actually then scaling that up to actually be able to grow a business. So the solution is to try and automate that. So products that we've got developed, and there are other products out there that will allow that data to be fed into the system, so that actually the solution can actually then plan and sort of schedule shifts accordingly. So from that, what happens is the data is fed in from availability, travel time, locations, client data, shift patterns, etc. Are all fed in, and then the system will then generate optimized schedule plans based upon the preferences of that particular client. So, for example, it might be that distance is an issue, and so therefore there's a weighting based on making sure that travel times are reduced as much as possible. The result of that, and the result of putting a system in place, is that staff motivation and retention is increased, because you're making sure that if an employee is able to work 20 hours a week, they're provided with 20 hours of work, because you can take the whole pot of data in one go. So staff tend to be more motivated and therefore are retained better. Cost reduction, and that's generally from, again, making sure you retain staff, therefore you remove those costs of recruitment. You're also reducing travel times, waiting times, and therefore making sure that those overheads are reduced as much as possible. Overtime, is obviously reduced. Staff retention, which we've just very much sort of touched on there, is massively improved, because if a carer, like I say, is available for 20 hours, they get those hours, and in a short distance blocked sort of method. Productivity is increased, and generally speaking, what we see is when a system is put into place that actually less staff members are used, but more fully, and therefore their productivity increases. They feel more satisfied in their job function, but then overall as a business there is more capacity to take on more work. Increased service delivery, so again by using a system to plan, to schedule, and therefore track and monitor, you can make sure service is actually delivered. So making sure that an employee turns up to a particular shift or not, and if not, then somebody's told about it, but also making sure people are turning up on time, and that's helped by reducing travel time, making sure shifts are kind of back to back as much as possible. And then, as mentioned before, sort of the reduction of overtime. So in summary, the idea of a workforce scheduling system and all the complexities, and that's just sort of one model there, by feeding those into a central product, a system, means that actually the changing requirements on a daily basis can be accounted for, and then the aims of that particular solution are then delivered. So cost reduction, streamlining processes, increased staff retention, increased productivity, and overall a healthier business by putting in some software and systems. Now, there are systems available to actually help produce that data. And then long term, that data then feeds into you being able to then future plan, be able to run models and some theories to see how that plan might look like, how futuristically mileage might be reduced as the sort of requirements for the shifts change and evolve. And over 20 questions that anybody's got.
Okay, thank you very much. Yeah, you've got a couple of questions waiting for you. Your first one is from Scott, and he asks, what size would my workforce need to be to warrant such a system?
Okay, that's a good question. We've seen sort of examples where Excel spreadsheets and paper-based systems can work up to, 30 or 40 staff members. However, that is heavily reliant on whoever that scheduler is knowing those staff members, knowing their availability, knowing where they live. And so it's really, I guess, down to the people that are running those Excel or paper-based systems. And invariably, if they're off sick or can't get in because of snow or whatever it might be, that kind of knowledge is kind of lost. So, we've seen companies implement a system like this when they've got sort of 25 or more staff members. Below that, it tends to be that, whether it's a care company, cleaning company, tend to be going through a growth stage anyway and are not ready for implementing a full system. So I guess it's 25 and above. We've got some clients that are north of 4,000 staff members, and having a sort of scheduling planning product is absolutely invaluable. So because just the sheer volume of data that's being sort of processed. So I guess the short answer is probably 25 or more, but it does depend. It could be that at 20, whoever's scheduling and planning shifts is struggling to keep up with the changes, client requirements, day-to-day changes, and so therefore it might be that a system to deal with some of that information might be applicable. Okay,
great. Got your next questions from Mike, and he says, what happens when our requirements change? For example, I've just lost a job, so how does this sort of system handle that?
Okay, so again, it handles it sort of quite seamlessly. So you've lost that job. That job is therefore cancelled or terminated, or it might be put on hold. It could be sort of pushed back a little bit. So that then produces a gap in that kind of set of sort of scheduled data. Now, with systems, you can actually hypothetically then rerun it and actually then feed and build up new schedules. Or you've then got an availability gap, which can then be used from a planning point of view. When you see a new client, you can say, okay, we've now got a gap between 9 and 11, Monday, Wednesday, Friday. And so actually you can see where your gaps are gaps are really, really easily. And often, again, with the type of clients we deal with, schedules and plans tend to be recurring. So it could be every single day, multiple times per day. And so actually a client cancellation might produce lots of gaps, but that then feeds into your availability for future planning. So you can then run sort of models and rerun it again based on continuity, and rerun your schedule so they're also blocked and nice and tidy. But in the care sector in particular, there are thousands of changes every single day, and that historically causes loads of problems. However, with a sort of a computerized system doing all the legwork for you really helps.
Great, thank you very much. Your next question is from Simon, and he says, why is retention, in your opinion, such an issue?
Okay, yeah, I mean, I think I probably touched on that a few times in the webinar. Retention in some sectors is a real challenge. So we see a large sort of cross section of again, care sector type clients, cleaning clients. Retaining good people for them is the single biggest challenge. When we talk to them, recruiting staff, onboarding them, doing 3 to 5 reference checks, DBS checks and training, then buddying up with somebody else is a big cost to a business, particularly then when you might lose 40 to 60% of that workforce overall in a 12-month period. So finding good people, retaining good people, we hear a lot is a challenge. So if a good person comes to that particular business, you want to try and retain them as much as possible. Now, if they're asking for 30 hours a week or 40 hours a week, and you're able to give them that in a optimized, low travel time basis, then that's going to help retain them. There are obviously a myriad of other factors, but we see a lot of people move around the care sector just simply because they're not getting enough hours from that care company or even cleaning company. They tend to be recruited for a single contract, a single client, and then when they don't get enough hours, they need to move on, because for them, care isn't necessarily a sort of a hobby. It is actually a career, and they need to be able to pay bills and feed children and those sorts of things. So retention, both, and we see this in the UK and internationally. And one example, in Ireland, there is actually now a shortage of carers in Ireland anyway. So actually, if there's a shortage, therefore demand is higher, and actually retaining the carers you've got is going to be even more important. So yeah, we just see that day in, day out, that retention is such a challenge.
Okay, thank you. You have another question, this one from Claire. How can this system be used for planning?
Okay, yeah, I think I've probably sort of touched on this. So we've got sort of systems that allow you to run hypothetical models. So you can take your existing planned work and all of your availability in terms of staff, along with qualifications and requirements and all of that data, those sort of 6 areas that we talked about, and run a hypothetical model. So what you can do is you can say, okay, what do my schedules look like? Who's going to be allocated if, for example, mileage is my only factor? If I want to reduce mileage down to the absolute minimum, and I want my employees to be travelling the absolute bare minimum, what does that schedule pattern look like? Conversely, it might not actually be mileage. It might be continuity that is my issue, and therefore I want the highest level of continuity possible. The same staff members visiting the same shifts, every single day, and therefore by firing that data into what we call the demo account, you can run that schedule, have a look at what that looks like, and then run reports like mileage reports, compliance reporting, to then see what those numbers would look like if you were to change your schedule patterns. Historically, to do that with your Excel spreadsheet or to do that with your piece of paper wouldn't be possible. You wouldn't be able to take all of your data and be able to, within 2 or 3 minutes, then run a hypothetical model of how that looks like. And as the business grows, being able to run those models to get the sort of comfortable line between continuity, distance, travel time, those sorts of things is important. So that's kind of how it can be used. We've seen also clients use availability and requirements comparisons. So, okay, I've got 200 hours of time available between 9 and 11. However, the requirements are between 12 and 2, and actually trying to mould the requirements and move the availability around to get them matched, so that you don't have to hire more people for those specific times of day. So again, because you've got data in a structured manner, you can actually use that from a planning point of view.
Okay, great. Thank you very much, David, for hosting today's webinar. I will send out a copy of the presentation and David's contacts out to you all shortly, so please do email him with any further questions. Before we close, just a quick reminder, if you would like to keep up to date on our latest webinars, please make sure you follow us on SlideShare or subscribe to our YouTube channel. You can also access all of our resources for business owners just by leaving us a comment. That's the end of today's BizSmart webinar. Thank you all for listening, and we hope you can join us again very soon.